She was just a poor 7-year-old girl until the day she helped a powerful CEO, and he saw something in her no one ever expected. The truth behind that birthmark will change everything. Welcome, I'm Marcos Paulo, the storyteller. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. On a cold, grey morning, the streets of downtown were congested, as always. Men in suits and women in high heels rushed from one side to the other, hurried and with no time to care about anything beyond their own schedules. The chaos of urban life spread across the sidewalks, with people oblivious to one another. Suddenly, a man with an unshakable posture and impeccable appearance dropped a dark leather briefcase right in the middle of the path, its documents scattering everywhere. The sound of the pages hitting the ground was muffled by the traffic noise. He tried to grab them quickly, but the papers danced in the wind, carried far away. A little girl, dressed in simple clothes and with a curious gaze, didn't think twice. Amid the rush of hurried people, she crouched down with an agility that contrasted with her small stature. Her messy hair mingled with the street dust, but she didn't mind. Her eyes sparkled as she found the papers, and with an unexpected strength for her age, she gathered them one by one, moving with precision, as if she had done it 1,000,000 times before. Her face showed a silent determination, reflecting a wisdom her young age couldn't explain. The man, close enough to witness her action, was left speechless. When the last sheet was retrieved, the girl looked up and saw the man watching her with a fixed, almost surprised stare. He didn't recognize her at first. After all, she seemed to be just another of the many children living on the streets, selling candy or cleaning car windows. But there was something different about her, something he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was the gleam in her eyes or her quiet courage. The man, dressed in an expensive suit and showing no sign of fatigue, gave a slight smile and thanked the girl. His voice was cold, emotionless, yet there was a hint of surprise in it. He handed her an envelope with an automatic gesture, as if it were a routine transaction. As she looked at the envelope in her hands, the man seemed to pay more attention to her than to the papers she had gathered. For a moment, he observed her as if trying to decipher something beyond what his eyes could see. Suddenly, his gaze locked onto the girl's shoulder, where a visible birthmark on the skin of her arm caught his attention. The mark, shaped like a crescent moon, was exactly the same as his sister's, who had died years ago. His heart raced, but he tried to control himself. How could this be? The girl was nothing more than a dirty, resourceless child. Yet the mark didn't lie. He glanced back at the documents, as if trying to convince himself it was nothing. After all, how many people in the world might have similar marks? But the feeling of something unusual began to spread through his body. He never believed in coincidences like this, especially not after what had happened in his family. A chill ran down his spine, and before he could say anything, the girl was already walking away. She looked back at him one last time with a shy smile and disappeared into the crowd. He stood there, unsure of what to do. Something in his chest tightened, and he didn't know what it meant. The envelope he had given the girl now felt heavier than before. The man looked at the empty street and reflected on what had happened. Something was unfolding here, something he didn't fully understand yet. But he knew he couldn't let it pass unnoticed. Perhaps that child was more than he imagined, and at that moment he made a silent promise to himself to find her again. But what would he do when he uncovered the truth? He knew that birthmark was the key to something greater. But what? Before leaving, he glanced at the envelope once more and walked toward his car. His mind raced with 1,000 questions but no answers. The girl was no longer in sight, but her impression was etched in his mind like a tattoo. Something about that encounter was about to change the course of his life, something far beyond mere coincidence. And though time passed, he knew that moment would never fade from his memory. The story was just beginning. The girl, named Clara, was no more than a 7-year-old child, but her life was very different from what many might imagine for a girl so young. Her bare feet touched the hot asphalt of the streets as she walked with her head down, her gaze as deep as the city's emptiness. She knew nothing beyond the harsh reality of the streets, where people rushed by and ignored her, as if she were just another shadow in the crowd. But Clara didn't mind. Since she learned to walk, she understood that the world had never been kind to her, and perhaps that's why she never succumbed to despair. Raised by her single mother, Clara's life was a daily struggle. The walls of her home, a small wooden shack at the end of the street, always seemed on the verge of collapsing. Her mother, who cleaned houses and worked as a seamstress, was rarely truly present. The little money she earned was just enough to provide scarce food, but not the comfort a child deserves. Clara knew she wasn't like other children her age. She had no toys, no school, and her only company was the sound of her own voice when she whispered her prayers before sleeping. But within her burned something stronger than poverty and loneliness: hope. She believed that one day life would take her somewhere better, though she never knew exactly how it would happen. She liked to think that her birthmark, a crescent moon scar on her left shoulder, was some kind of sign. Perhaps it was the key to something great. She had never heard of anyone else with it, but always felt something extraordinary might come from it. The problem was that no one else seemed to notice. To most, Clara was just another street child, yet there was a silent strength in her eyes. Those brown eyes, almost golden in the sunlight, were a reflection of her soul. Clara knew life was testing her in ways other children couldn't imagine. She didn't give in to pain and suffering, not because she didn't feel them, but because she had learned to endure them. Her deepest desire, deep down, was to make her mother smile. She saw so many children with their parents and dreamed that one day she too could have a life filled with love and laughter. The days were tough, but Clara didn't let herself be defeated. She sold small items on the streets: candy, old magazines, even flowers she picked from abandoned gardens. Sometimes she found something to sell to buy food. Though small, she was clever. She knew how to get by, and that's how, on that day, she received the envelope the CEO had given her. The man had no idea that this small gesture of gratitude would turn into something so significant. As she walked the streets and gazed at shop windows, Clara didn't have grand dreams, but she had something many lose as they grow: the ability to imagine. She imagined that one day she could be someone important, someone who made a difference in the world. Not for money or fame, but to help people like her, those who fought daily for a shred of dignity. Clara didn't know how, but she had a hunch that something great awaited her. Something that would lift her from the shadows of the streets to shine in the world. That morning, after handing the papers to the CEO, Clara thought about what to do with the envelope he'd given her. When she opened it, she found a small amount of money, more than she'd ever seen. Her eyes sparkled. The temptation to buy candy or toys was strong, but she knew what was truly needed. With that money, she could buy a bit more food for home, easing her mother's worries for a while. Clara didn't know that this simple act would forever alter the course of her life. She still didn't know who the suited man was, but she felt destiny had intertwined with hers in a way she couldn't comprehend. The following days were ordinary. Clara continued her routine of working, helping her mother and trying to survive. But at night, before sleeping, she often thought about the man she'd met. Why did he seem so disturbed after seeing her? He was more surprised than grateful. He seemed to know something about her she didn't, and that made her wonder. Perhaps her birthmark was more than she imagined, or maybe it was just a coincidence, something meaningless. But somehow, Clara knew something big was about to happen. The world, with all its shadows, was preparing to reveal something she never imagined. The days that followed were tense for Clara. She felt something was about to change, but she didn't know what. The city, once so vast and indifferent, now seemed to close in around her, as if waiting for her to make a decision. That morning, Clara woke early as usual and went to the small flower shop to try selling what she'd picked in the field. But upon arriving, she was met with a scene she could never have predicted. A woman in an elegant suit entered the shop and upon seeing her simply said, You're the girl who met the CEO, aren't you?" Clara was dumbfounded, unsure of what was happening. The woman didn't wait for Clara's response and continued, "What did you do to him? Why did he look at you like that? Do you have some connection to him?" Clara didn't know what to say. She felt pressure in her chest, a sense of being watched more closely than ever before. The woman seemed to know something Clara still didn't understand. Before she could explain, the woman stepped closer, and her next words hit like a bomb. "Mr. Gabriel doesn't forgive, girl. He remembers everything, even the smallest details." With a cold smile, the woman turned and left the shop, leaving Clara in total confusion. Those words echoed in Clara's mind all day. Who was this Gabriel? The name sounded familiar, as if her mother had mentioned it, but she'd never dwelled on it. What troubled her most was the feeling that somewhere in this whirlwind of events, she was being drawn into something bigger. She knew there was more to her birthmark, something she hadn't yet grasped, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to uncover the truth. The idea that something grand might await her gave her hope, but also fear. And it was on that very day that her life took another unexpected turn. Clara was heading home when she suddenly heard quick footsteps behind her. Before she could turn, a heavy hand grabbed her arm, nearly knocking her down. When she looked up, her eyes met those of a man she'd never seen before. He had a cruel expression and the look of someone pursuing something, and Clara knew it wasn't her he was after. "You have something that belongs to me," he said in a low, threatening voice. The girl, frightened, tried to pull free, but the man's grip held her firm. What did he want? Clara didn't know, but something inside her said this encounter wasn't just a coincidence. She knew now that something was approaching, and it wasn't good. The man, realizing he couldn't get what he wanted from her, released her and with a malicious smile said, "You'll see, this won't end well for you." Without further explanation, he vanished into the crowd. A chill ran down Clara's spine. She knew somehow that she had been marked by something far greater than she could imagine. But what? Deep down, Clara could no longer ignore that her life was about to turn upside down. The woman in the shop, the threatening man, and the constant feeling that something was coming. It all seemed connected, as if a game were being played, and she was a key piece in it. But what was the goal? What was at stake? Clara had no answers, but she felt she needed to prepare for the worst. It was as if the universe were conspiring against her, yet also in some way guiding her towards something she couldn't avoid. She knew she needed answers, and soon. Something inside her told her she could no longer go home and wait for things to resolve themselves. The game had begun, and Clara was being pulled to its center, unsure of how or why. But the fear that gripped her didn't paralyze her. On the contrary, it made her even more determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. She felt a growing anger within her, anger at the fate imposed on her, at the pain she felt, and at the uncertainty surrounding her. But there was also something more, an uncontrollable will to fight, to rebel against everything trying to crush her. Night fell earlier than Clara expected. The sky was dark and threatening, and she knew she could no longer stand still. Whatever was happening, she couldn't wait for the problem to solve itself. She needed to act. But what to do? How to escape something so vast, so relentless, without even knowing what it was? One thing was certain. The conflict was about to begin, and Clara was about to be tested in ways she never imagined. The real game was about to start. Clara could hardly sleep that night. The silence of the house seemed to carry the weight of her doubts and uncertainties. The next morning, she woke with the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. When she entered the kitchen, her mother was there, sewing another piece for a client who, as always, paid little for the hard work. Clara watched her for a moment, knowing her mother would never imagine what the girl was facing. But before she could ask anything, the house phone rang. Her mother answered, and upon hearing the voice on the other end, she turned pale. Clara immediately sensed something was wrong. Her mother hung up the phone with a tense expression and said, her voice trembling, "Clara, you need to go to Mr. Gabriel's mansion." The name thundered in the girl's ears. Gabriel's mansion. But what did he want with her? She had no doubt that this name was connected to the suited man she'd met days ago, but what did he want? A chill ran down her spine. She knew nothing good could come of this. But looking at her mother, who seemed even paler than before, she didn't have the courage to question her. "You'll earn something in return. He asked for you to come today," her mother continued, avoiding Clara's gaze. "I know you're scared, but this is important for our survival. There's no other way." Clara didn't know what to say. Her mother was sacrificing her, putting the girl in an even tougher situation. Clara understood what this meant. Gabriel's mansion wasn't just a rich, distant place, but a symbol of the power he held over everyone, even her. And though she didn't want to go, she needed to understand why this man sought her. Upon arriving at the mansion, Clara was stunned by its grandeur: golden iron gates, vast gardens, and a facade that seemed straight out of a movie. She felt tiny and insignificant before its majesty. When she rang the bell, the doorman looked at her with disdain, but upon realizing she was the one they awaited, he let her in. Clara climbed the immense marble staircase, feeling smaller with each step, as if the whole world were trying to swallow her existence. Her footsteps echoed through the empty corridors of the mansion, and she couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and anger growing inside her. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. Finally, she was led to a large office where Mr. Gabriel awaited, seated behind a mahogany desk. He looked at her with a serious expression, but said nothing. Clara stood still, observing him. He was the suited man she'd met on the street, and now he was here before her, as if she were just another piece in his game. "You know who I am, don't you?" he asked, his voice low but authoritative. Clara didn't respond. "Then you must know I don't play games with others. Now tell me, what does that mark on your body mean?" The question was so direct that Clara barely had time to react. She felt a heat rise to her face, and before she could control it, fear took over her body. I don't know," she stammered, her throat dry. Gabriel looked at her with a disdainful expression. "You don't know? How curious." He stood and walked toward her, as if assessing her every move. "I'm trying to be patient, but I don't have time for games. You will tell me the truth now." He stepped closer, placing his hands on the table, staring directly into her eyes. Clara felt the weight of the situation crushing her. She wanted to run, to escape, but her feet seemed glued to the floor. The tension in the room was palpable. She knew she was in danger, but also that she couldn't lie to this man. Gabriel was here, not because she had done something wrong, but because he knew she had something he needed. And in some way, he didn't believe in coincidences. I don't know what you mean," Clara said again, trying to evade the pressure. But Gabriel's response was a cruel smile. "You don't know, but you will soon find out." And then, the worst happened. He took the envelope with the money he'd given her, threw it at her, and said coldly, "This isn't what you think. I'm not here to be kind to you, girl. If you don't tell me what I want to know, you'll pay the price, and the price will be high." Clara felt humiliation coursing through her veins. He was treating her like a disposable piece, a tool to achieve his own ends. But what did he want from her? And why was the birthmark so important to him? She left the mansion that day with a heavy heart, her head spun with all the unanswered questions. But one thing she knew for sure: she could no longer hide. The man in the suit, now with an even more palpable power, was determined to make her reveal something she didn't yet understand. And Clara felt, for the first time, the weight of being a piece in a game she barely comprehended, but into which she was being pushed. Clara couldn't stop Gabriel's words from echoing in her mind. When she got home, the walls seemed tighter, as if closing in around her. Her mother, standing by the window, noticed the heavy silence that filled the house. Clara approached slowly, her footsteps echoing down the small hallway. She sat in a corner of the room, saying nothing. Her mother, unsure of what had happened, watched her with concern-filled eyes. Clara then let out a deep sigh and with a muffled voice said, "He knows, Mom. He knows about the mark, and he won't stop until he finds out what it means." The girl's words sounded like a sentence. Her mother hugged her tightly, but Clara felt the weight of disappointment in her arms. The woman didn't know what to do. She couldn't protect her daughter from someone like Gabriel. She knew her life had been marked by defeats, by endless struggles, but hearing her 7-year-old daughter speak so clearly about an uncertain future made her realize Clara was no longer the same. Something inside her had awakened, and for the first time, her mother felt that the girl was closer to finding her own strength. Clara said nothing more, but her mind was racing. What did Gabriel want from her? And why had her mother never spoken about the mark? She had so many questions, and the answers seemed more distant than ever. But as she looked at the envelope Gabriel had given her, something in her chest calmed. It was as if that object, simple yet laden with power, was a sign. She knew her life, one way or another, had been changed forever. The mark she carried wasn't just a scar. It was a symbol of something greater, something she needed to understand. That night, Clara felt a determination bloom within her. Even without knowing what would come next, she knew she could no longer remain passive to what lay ahead. She needed to understand what her mark truly meant. And more importantly, she needed to know why Gabriel sought her. The fear she felt was real, but a silent strength was growing inside her soul. Clara sensed there was a purpose in her life, something that couldn't be ignored. The next day, she woke before her mother, as usual, and went out to the streets. But this time, she wasn't just selling flowers or trying to earn enough to help at home. She was on a mission to find answers. Clara didn't know where to start, but she felt that somehow destiny would guide her. She walked the city streets, head held high, eyes alert to every person passing by. Those once innocent, fear-filled eyes were now focused. The girl was transforming into something more than a child trying to survive. It was then that she met an elderly man sitting on a wooden chair at a street corner. He seemed just another figure in the urban landscape. But when their eyes met, Clara felt an instant connection. She approached hesitantly and asked, "Have you ever seen someone with a crescent moon mark on their shoulder, like mine?" The man looked at her for a moment, his expression mixing surprise and weariness, and replied, "Yes, girl. I saw that mark many years ago. Do you know who owns it?" Clara was speechless. She knew there was more to this story, something that tied her destiny to something far greater than she could imagine. But at that moment, she knew she had taken the first step toward the truth. She wasn't alone in this journey anymore. The path was beginning to reveal itself. And though fear remained, Clara no longer felt like a victim of circumstances. She felt strong, capable of facing whatever lay ahead. The re-beginning had started. The past was a weight she was willing to leave behind. The days following her encounter with the old man were different for Clara. Something had changed within her. Before, she saw herself as just a lost girl amid a cold, impersonal city. But now there was something deeper in her gaze, something that said she was searching for something greater than mere survival. She woke earlier with a silent determination. Each morning she looked at her mother, who still struggled to sustain the household, and felt she could no longer wait for things to change. She needed to act. Life wouldn't hand her answers. She had to seek them. Clara began to step away from the streets where she sold flowers and magazines, venturing into areas she'd never imagined entering. Her mind was full of questions. What did the mark mean? What did Gabriel want from her? What else was her mother hiding? She didn't know how, but something inside her told her that if she kept going, everything would be revealed. The streets, once threatening, were now just a path to follow, a journey she was ready to undertake. The girl was becoming more perceptive, observing people around her with sharper eyes, seeking answers in the simplest details. It was then that Clara met a new character, an old librarian who, upon seeing her on her first visit to the city library, called her the girl with the mark. He remembered seeing someone very much like her, a woman who, years ago, also sought answers. Clara was surprised, but curiosity won out. The librarian, seeing the interest in her eyes, decided to tell her more about the mark. According to him, the mark wasn't just any symbol, but the seal of an ancient lineage tied to a power few understood. He explained that this mark had been passed down through generations, but its true strength would only manifest when the bearer was ready to accept their destiny. Those words shocked Clara. An ancient lineage, power. She, a poor street child, linked to something so grand. It seemed impossible, but the old librarian seemed convinced of what he said. He also revealed that Gabriel, the suited man, had a long-standing connection to the lineage and was obsessed with finding the mark's bearer, believing that person held the key to restoring his family's lost empire. The librarian's words were like a distant echo, a warning. Clara felt a mix of fear and excitement, as if being pushed into a story she never imagined belonging to. In the days that followed, Clara delved deeper into her own history. She scoured the library's books, reading everything she could about ancient lineages, birthmarks, and any clues that might help her understand what was happening. Each discovery left her more confused yet stronger. She didn't know how, but she now knew Gabriel wasn't the only one seeking answers. She was at the center of a much larger dispute, involving not just her past, but her future. Her mother, noticing how much Clara had changed, tried to talk to her. "Daughter, what you're searching for won't bring happiness. You can't change what's in your destiny," she said, her eyes filled with concern. But Clara, with a determined look, replied, "I don't know what I'm looking for, but I need to find out. Something is calling me, Mom, and I need to follow it." She knew her mother loved her, but there was something she herself didn't yet understand. What was at stake was bigger than anything Clara had ever imagined, and no matter how hard it would be, she couldn't turn back. With each passing day, Clara grew wiser. She learned to observe people differently, to understand the small signs the world gave her. But as she advanced in her journey, Gabriel's presence seemed to draw closer. He hadn't given up, and Clara knew he was always one step ahead. But that no longer frightened her. She could no longer be a spectator in her own life. She needed to act. Something within her was awakening, a silent strength she never knew she had. She was beginning to realize that her journey wasn't just about escaping Gabriel, but about finding her own truth. One quiet afternoon, as Clara returned home after another day of study, she saw something that stopped her cold. The man in the suit, Gabriel, stood on the corner, looking at her with an enigmatic smile. "You're getting more interesting, Clara," he said, his tone a mix of challenge and recognition. She felt invaded by a blend of anger and fear. He knew she was uncovering more about her mark, making him even more dangerous. But deep down, Clara knew he was no longer an unknown threat. Now he was just an obstacle in her path, and she was determined to overcome him. The tension was mounting. Clara knew she was being watched, but couldn't predict what would come next. She was walking the streets when a sudden chill ran down her spine. There was nothing visible, but the pressure in the air was unmistakable. She felt she was being observed, and the weight of responsibility was becoming unbearable. Each step brought her closer to Gabriel, and at the same time, closer to her own truth. But it wasn't until that moment that she truly grasped how dangerous the path ahead would be. One night, as she headed home, Clara was surrounded by two tall, shadowy men who emerged from an alley. They didn't seem to be sent by Gabriel, but they were a threat as great as he was. Before she could react, one grabbed her arm with force, while the other approached with a cruel smile. "You're messing with things you don't understand, girl," the man said in a threatening tone. "This game isn't for you. If you keep going, you'll regret it." Clara tried to break free, but the men's strength was immense. They were more than willing to make her life a nightmare if it meant stopping her search. She fought against them, but knew she was at a severe disadvantage. Fear overwhelmed her, but something inside refused to let her give up. When the closer man raised a knife, Clara's heart raced, and a surge of adrenaline coursed through her. In a desperate move, she kicked the man holding her, managing to break free for a moment, but it was only for a second. As she tried to run, the other man caught up quickly, pulling her by the hair and throwing her against the wall. The pain was intense, but the terror was greater. She was alone, with no real chance to defend herself. She felt powerless, as if she were just a child who didn't belong in this world. And deep down, she knew the life she was trying to change might be bigger than she imagined. Tears began to stream down her face, but even so, she refused to give up. She wouldn't be the one crushed by the shadows. When all seemed lost, a loud sound broke the tension. Someone was approaching quickly, and the two men stepped away from Clara with an impatient gesture. "See, even fate abandons you," taunted the man holding her. But Clara didn't understand. Why had they stopped? What was happening? Then she saw what seemed to be a familiar figure approaching, a figure from her nightmares, Gabriel. He was there, standing still, watching everything with a cold expression. His eyes seemed empty, yet a menacing glint reflected in his gaze. "Let her go," Gabriel said with authority, his icy voice cutting through the air. Clara didn't know what to think. What did he want now? Why was he here after everything he'd done? The men hesitated, but upon seeing the determination in Gabriel's eyes, they finally released her and retreated, vanishing into the shadows. Clara was stunned. What had just happened? For a moment, she stood there, trembling, unsure if she could trust Gabriel or if he was just using her as another piece in his game. But he, unlike what she expected, didn't seem to want anything from her at that moment. He simply observed her, saying nothing. Gabriel then looked at her, and Clara felt a strange sensation as she met his gaze. "I saw what you did, girl," he said, his expression not exactly one of disdain, but something more complex. "You're not like the others, and because of that, you'll be harder to destroy." He gave a slight smile, as if more impressed than anything else. Clara didn't know whether to feel relieved or even more terrified. The sense of being a piece in a much larger game, whose rules she still didn't fully grasp, was overwhelming. But despite her fear, Clara felt a flame beginning to grow within her. She wouldn't give up. This wouldn't be how her story ended. Whatever had happened in that moment, it wasn't just a warning from Gabriel, it was a test. Clara had been tested then. She nearly succumbed to fear and pain, but something inside her refused to be defeated. She knew the battle was just beginning, and the next steps would be even more challenging. But for the first time, she knew she had something more within her. She wouldn't be a victim anymore. She wouldn't be someone who only ran. She stood up, brushed the dust from her shoulders, and with a determined look, turned to Gabriel. "You won't stop me," she said firmly, her words echoing in the silent street. In the days following her confrontation with Gabriel, Clara couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The man didn't seem intent on killing her, but the tension in his presence was palpable. He had let her live, but why? Clara knew she was part of a much larger game than she'd imagined, and that brief intervention wasn't just a display of power. There was something deeper in this situation, something she couldn't decipher. Her mind was full of unanswered questions, and she needed to learn more about what was truly happening. Then something unexpected occurred. Clara, in her relentless search for answers, met someone who would change the course of her journey. One afternoon, as she wandered the streets almost aimlessly, a man approached her discreetly, as if he knew exactly who she was. He introduced himself as Samuel, a middle-aged man with piercing eyes and a calm demeanor, though his voice held an enigmatic quality that made Clara feel he knew more than he let on. "You're looking for answers, aren't you?" he asked softly. The girl looked at him surprised, but also felt a strange trust in him. "You know what's happening, don't you?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. Samuel smiled almost imperceptibly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "I know more than you can imagine, Clara," he replied, his words sounding like a revelation. "I know the story of your mark, and I know the lineage you belong to. More than that, I know what Gabriel is seeking, and you are the key to it all." Clara stared at him, unsure if she should believe him. The fear of being manipulated again, of being just another piece in someone's game, consumed her. But there was something in Samuel that made her think he didn't want to destroy her. On the contrary, he seemed to want to help her. "Why did you come to me?" Clara asked, suspicion still lingering in her eyes. Samuel paused before answering, looking at her with a grave expression. "Because, Clara, you're not the only one carrying this burden. You have something Gabriel wants, and I have information that can save your life. But for that, we need a pact. Will you listen to me? You need to trust me." Clara hesitated, feeling a whirlwind inside her. She knew she had few options. Gabriel pursued her. Her mother was powerless to help, and she herself was beginning to lose herself amid so many questions. The life she knew had turned upside down, and perhaps Samuel was the only one who could guide her through this maze. After a long silence, Clara decided to hear him out. "What do you know?" she asked with a resolute voice, trying to hide the anxiety she felt. Samuel took a deep breath, as if carefully weighing his words. "I know you are the last descendant of a secret lineage, a lineage tied to an ancient power. But that power isn't easily controlled, Clara. It can be your salvation or your destruction, depending on how you use it." He paused, letting his words echo in the girl's mind. "Gabriel, like other powerful people, seeks this power, and he believes you, with the mark on your body, hold the key to unlocking everything he desires." Clara felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. "Are you saying I'm the key to something dangerous?" Samuel nodded. "Yes, Clara, but also the key to freedom. You have the power to change the fate of everyone around you, but you need to understand what's at stake first. Are you willing to learn?" Clara looked at him, her eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and curiosity. Something inside her knew she had no other choice but to move forward, and it was there, with Samuel by her side, that she felt hope of winning for the first time. "I'm ready," Clara replied, her words filled with a new kind of determination. She knew that from that moment, her life would never be the same. Samuel had become her ally, but she also knew the price of the truth would be high. She didn't yet know what the future held, but for the first time, she didn't feel as much fear. Perhaps it was too late to turn back, but she was beginning to understand that her journey wasn't about escaping something. It was about embracing who she truly was. Clara felt the moment was nearing. She was no longer the same girl who hid in the shadows of fear. Her journey had transformed her, shaped her in a way she barely recognized. With Samuel by her side, she discovered that her mark wasn't just a sign of heritage, but a promise of power, a power that, if misused, could destroy everything she loved. Gabriel knew this, and he wouldn't rest until he had her under his control. But Clara was no longer fragile, and the idea of being manipulated by him enraged her. After weeks of preparation, Clara was ready to face him. The plan Samuel helped her devise was simple but bold. She would infiltrate Gabriel's mansion, confront his guards, and somehow face him head-on. Samuel was aware of the risks, but he knew she couldn't run forever. It was time to act. "Remember, Clara, you have more control than you think. The power is within you, not in Gabriel's hands," he advised, his eyes full of concern, but also confidence in her. Clara nodded, feeling the energy grow inside her. She wasn't just going to the mansion to face Gabriel, she was going to finally understand her true identity. When Clara reached Gabriel's immense mansion, the tension in the air was palpable. She had prepared for many challenges, but the sight of those imposing walls, the golden iron gate rising before her, nearly made her resolve falter. But there was no turning back. She knew what was at stake. With calm breaths and steady steps, Clara advanced, ignoring the threats and the guards' disdainful looks. She had crossed many invisible barriers, and this wouldn't be different. Without hesitation, she approached the main door and, with a swift movement, pushed it open. Inside the mansion, Clara was greeted by an empty, silent room and a feeling that everything was about to change. Each step she took echoed off the walls, as if the house itself were watching her. Suddenly, Gabriel appeared on the staircase, a mocking smile on his face. He was calm, almost serene, as if he knew he controlled the situation. "You made it here, Clara. I confess I didn't think you had the courage to truly face me," he said, a hint of irony in his voice. Clara looked at him with firmness, her gaze fearless. It's not courage, Gabriel. It's destiny, and you won't manipulate me anymore, she said, her words sharp as blades. The man observed her for a moment, as if assessing something invisible between them. The smile slowly faded, and his expression turned serious. You don't understand, girl. There's no escaping what you are. You have the power, yes, but you don't know how to use it. I do, and that's why you're here. He stepped forward, his piercing gaze searching for any sign of weakness. You've always been just a tool, Clara, never what you thought you were. Gabriel's words echoed in Clara's mind, but she didn't waver. The truth was revealing itself to her. He wanted control, not just over her, but over everything she represented. He feared the power she carried, and that made her realize what her mark truly meant. It wasn't just a birthmark. It was the symbol of her lineage, her ability to change the course of destiny. And now she knew that to save everything she loved, she needed to use that power against him. Gabriel advanced, his posture threatening, and Clara felt the air around her thicken. She knew she was facing her greatest challenge, but instead of retreating, she prepared herself. She closed her eyes for a moment and focused. Samuel had spoken the truth. The power was within her. It wasn't something controlled by force, but by the mind. Clara felt the energy emanating from her mark, the strength of the lineage flowing through her veins. She could feel the power pulsing in her body, waiting for the right moment to be released. When she opened her eyes, something changed. The air grew denser, the light around her more intense. Clara extended her hand toward Gabriel, and a wave of energy enveloped the room. Gabriel was surprised, stepping back. He felt the power radiating from Clara, something he never imagined possible. You can't control it, Clara, he said, his voice full of rage. That power wasn't made for you. But Clara, with her eyes gleaming with determination, replied, You don't decide what I am, Gabriel. The battle between them was intense. Gabriel used every trick and scheme to dominate Clara, but she held firm, knowing deep down he could never control the power within her. The fight culminated in a moment of pure tension, where Clara finally unleashed her full potential. A burst of light and energy filled the mansion, bringing Gabriel to his knees, unable to resist her strength. He looked at her with a horrified expression, finally realizing he had no dominion over her. When the energy dissipated, Clara stood before Gabriel, victorious, but with a mix of relief and sadness. What she had done wasn't just defeating a physical enemy. She had overcome something much greater. She had defeated the deep fears that had imprisoned her, not only from Gabriel, but from the doubt and fear that had lived in her heart. Clara was no longer the helpless girl who hid in the shadows. She was the guardian of an ancient power, but more than that, she was the master of her own destiny. The mark on her shoulder now glowed with a soft, comforting light, symbolizing her victory over the ghosts of her past. The air in the mansion was tense, almost electric, as if the entire universe had paused for a brief moment. Clara felt the power pulsing within her, still strong after her confrontation with Gabriel, but the battle was far from over. She knew this wasn't just another physical fight. It wasn't just about defeating a man, but about breaking the invisible chains destiny had placed on her path. Gabriel, now weakened, lay on the floor, but his fury still burned like a flame. You think you've won, Clara? He said with a crooked smile, his eyes blazing with rage. You may defeat me, but you can't stop what's already in motion. The power you hold won't save you. You'll lose yourself in it, like all before you. His words sounded like a curse, a desperate attempt to weaken Clara's confidence. But she knew what was at stake now. This was no longer a simple power struggle, but a fight for her own identity. She approached him, calmer than she'd ever felt before. The fear that had accompanied her was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. You're wrong, Gabriel, she said, her voice steady and unshakable. I'm not here to save myself. I'm here to save everyone you've harmed. The lineage you claim isn't yours to command. The power you fear isn't mine to give. It's mine to protect. Clara's words were simple, but they carried the weight of an ancient truth. She was there not to dethrone Gabriel or seek revenge, but to break the cycle of oppression he represented. He wanted to use her as a chess piece, a tool in his plan, but she wouldn't be a pawn in his game. She would be the change, the force that dismantled the empire of lies and manipulation he had built. Gabriel tried to rise, but his strength was spent. He launched a desperate strike at Clara, but she, with a fluid and precise movement, used the power of her lineage to deflect the energy he tried to impose on her. A burst of light emanated from her body, an aura of protection and strength that seemed to disintegrate Gabriel's rage and malice. The clash of forces made the mansion's walls tremble, but Clara remained steadfast, like a rock in a storm. "No more," she said, with a conviction that resounded throughout the room. And with that simple gesture, she released all the power within her. The energy of her lineage, which had been wasted and misdirected for so long, now flowed with pure intent and control. She was no longer just reacting to the world around her. She was shaping her own destiny. The impact of the energy Clara unleashed was so intense that the entire mansion seemed to shake. Gabriel fell to his knees, his strength fading like a dying flame. He looked at Clara, his eyes now filled with despair and understanding. You can't do this," he whispered, but his words were stolen by the power she had invoked. He had failed. The empire of manipulation he had tried to build over Clara had crumbled, and with it, the last piece of his control. Clara, now victorious, felt a wave of exhaustion overtake her, but also a deep peace. What she had done wasn't just defeating a villain. She had overcome the fears that had bound her for so long. She was no longer the helpless girl who hid in the shadows. She was the guardian of an ancient power, but more than that, she was the master of her own fate. The mark on her shoulder now glowed with a soft, comforting light, symbolizing her triumph over the ghosts of her past. The battle was over. What remained now was reconstruction of her own being, her own story, and perhaps, most importantly, the freedom of others oppressed by men like Gabriel. Clara had won, but the true challenge was just beginning, to transform the power she now carried into something that would benefit the world around her. Clara was breathless, but the feeling of victory enveloped her, as if a huge pressure had been lifted from her shoulders. The power she had unleashed seemed to have transformed not only Gabriel's mansion, but the very atmosphere around her. She looked at Gabriel's body on the floor and felt no pleasure in his defeat. Instead, she felt a silent sadness. The man who once represented great evil was now just a shadow of who he had been, but somehow he was still a victim of his own relentless pursuit of power. But the impact of her decision was immediate and profound. The mansion, once a fortress of power, now seemed empty, like an abandoned shell. The walls, which had witnessed so many intrigues and manipulations, were now covered in cracks, as if the structure supporting that empire of lies had disintegrated along with Gabriel. Clara sat on the floor, feeling exhaustion take over her body. She had won, but the cost of victory was higher than she had imagined. As she looked around, Clara realized something was wrong. The mansion was too quiet, no sound of movement, no cries of triumph. Something still hung in the air, a sense of emptiness. She tried to stand, but her strength was nearly drained. Her head spun, and she felt as if she were floating. What would happen now? Clara's internal struggle wasn't just about defeating Gabriel, but about what she would do with the power she now carried. She knew she couldn't simply return to her old life. The poor girl who hid in the shadows was gone. Now she was something much greater, and what would she do with that power? The weight of her choices was beginning to reveal itself. It was then that she heard footsteps. At first, she thought they might be more enemies, or perhaps some remnant of Gabriel's forces, but as she turned, she saw Samuel approaching. His face was serious, but there was a calm in him that immediately soothed Clara. He crouched beside her, his expression one of concern. "You did what needed to be done, Clara," he said with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. "But now, the real fight begins." Clara looked at him, still trying to process everything that had happened. What happens now? I won. But what do I do with this power? What do I do with who I am now? She didn't know if she was asking Samuel or herself. The victory seemed to bring more questions than answers. Samuel sighed as if preparing for a great revelation. You are the last of an ancient lineage, Clara. What you do with this power is more important than the victory you just achieved. You have a choice. Use this power to change the world around you, or let it be corrupted, as it has with so many before you. Those words felt like a burden to Clara. She had always known her mark had meaning, but never imagined it would carry such a great responsibility. This wasn't just about protecting herself or seeking revenge against those who had oppressed her. Her fight now was for something much larger. I don't know if I'm capable of doing that, Samuel. I don't know if I'm strong enough, Clara said, her voice faltering as her thoughts swirled in her mind. Samuel looked at her with intensity, his deep eyes reflecting wisdom and silent understanding. You're stronger than you think, Clara, but what you do with it depends on your ability to choose what is right, not what is easy. Power, my friend, can be a great blessing, but also a great curse. He stood and stepped back, leaving Clara with her own reflections. She remained there for a moment, alone, looking at Gabriel's body and feeling the weight of responsibility in her chest. This wasn't just about fighting villains. It was about what to do with the freedom she had won, how to use it without losing herself. Clara knew her journey wasn't over. She wasn't the lost child of the streets anymore. She was the guardian of an ancient power, and the world now lay before her, awaiting the choices she would make. But what would she do with that power? How could she ensure it didn't corrupt her, as it had so many before? The answer was still distant, but one thing was certain: Clara would no longer be controlled, not by Gabriel, not by anyone. She was ready to begin her true journey, a journey that would take her to places she never imagined, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could build a world where power was used for good, not domination. Clara walked slowly through the mansion's now silent corridors, feeling the weight of the decisions she had made. Her confrontation with Gabriel seemed so distant, as if it had been just a nightmare, but she knew it wasn't a dream. The fight hadn't been just physical, but emotional, spiritual. She had faced something within herself, a deep fear, a doubt that had always accompanied her even before she knew of her lineage. That power, which she now understood, represented much more than a heritage. It was a reflection of what she could be, what she would choose to be. As she observed the debris around her, Clara thought of Samuel's words, "What you do with the power is more important than the victory." She couldn't get that phrase out of her head. When she looked at the ruined mansion, she didn't see just a collapsed structure. She saw the reality that Gabriel's empire, which represented the abuse of power and control, had fallen. But what remained now? What would Clara do with all this? The power she now carried in her body and soul wasn't something that could be easily ignored. It was within her, pulsing with every beat of her heart, calling her to act. She knew that, before anything else, she needed to understand who she truly was. When she looked at her mark, the symbol of her lineage, Clara no longer saw a stigma of weakness, but a mark of potential, a mark of responsibility. She wasn't the child who feared the future anymore. She now understood that the future was in her hands. It was she who decided what to do with the power, with life, with the choices she would have to make going forward. I have to be different. I can't be what Gabriel wanted me to be. I can't be a weapon, a chess piece in a game that was never mine. These words resounded in Clara's mind. She realized with clarity that the true battle wasn't just against others, but against the versions of herself she could have become. She wouldn't be a slave to power or a servant of fate. Clara would choose her own path. She remembered her life before all this, the poor girl living in a forgotten neighborhood, with no one to protect her. She had a bleak future ahead, one where she would never be more than a shadow in a society that rejected her. But all that changed the moment she helped Gabriel pick up those documents on the street. The moment he looked at her mark and something awoke within him, and it was then, in that instant, that Clara realized something she never imagined. Destiny hadn't chosen her to be a victim, but to be a leader who could change everything. She thought of her mother, of the hardships they faced, of the nights when she nearly gave up believing something better was possible. But what she now knew, with absolute certainty, was that what truly matters isn't the circumstances you're born into, but the choices you make throughout life. And deep down, Clara felt that her choices were just beginning. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Samuel, and perhaps others too, who shared the same desire for justice. She wouldn't have to fight alone anymore, not anymore. The weight of power was great, but Clara now knew how to carry it. What would she do with it? She didn't have all the answers, but one thing she knew: she wouldn't use her lineage to rule or manipulate others, as Gabriel tried to do. No, she would use her power to create a new path, to help those who, like her, had been abandoned. She would open doors, not close them. She would bring hope, not darkness. The world before her was still vast and full of challenges. Clara wasn't ready for all the answers, but she was beginning to understand the question. Power wasn't the key, but the way you chose to use it. She didn't want to be a shadow of her family's past. She wanted to be the light that illuminated the paths of those still lost. And as she looked to the horizon, Clara knew her journey was just beginning. Clara walked through the field near the mansion, now unhurried, as if each step were a meditation on what had happened and what lay ahead. She had learned so much in such a short time, and her heart was at peace. But one crucial question remained. What remained of her old life? Who was she really now, after all she had been through? As she approached a small village, a familiar place, Clara's heart raced. She knew she was heading toward something important. Her body seemed to pull her toward this encounter, as if an invisible connection existed between her and what was about to happen. When she reached the village's central square, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. Clara paused for a moment, the wind caressing her face, and her eyes lit up. There was her mother, with her graying hair and weathered hands, but with the same warm, tender eyes she remembered. The woman who had raised her with love, who taught her to fight, who never gave up on her. She had missed her more than anything else. Seeing her mother, Clara felt the weight of all the pain and choices made finally dissipate, as if a wave of relief washed over her. Her mother looked at Clara with a confused expression at first, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. But upon recognizing who stood before her, her eyes filled with tears. "Clara, my daughter, you're back." Her mother's voice trembled and her arms opened as if to embrace the entire world. "I thought that you'd never come back. Where have you been? What happened to you?" The words poured out in a rush, but Clara knew there was no way to explain it all at once. The story was too big for simple words. Clara approached slowly, feeling the strength of a love that hadn't been broken despite everything. She threw herself into her mother's arms, feeling the warm tears stream down her face. "Mum, I'm here now. I'm a different person. I finally understood who I am." Her mother, in silence, hugged her daughter with all the love in the world. No questions, no judgments, simply welcoming the child who had returned. It was as if time had bent for them, offering a chance for reunion, for silent forgiveness. There was no need to speak of all that had happened. The simple act of being there, one in the other's arms, was enough to heal the wounds of the past. The reunion with her mother was a milestone for Clara, a new chance to move forward. She knew that, looking at her mother, she no longer needed to hide who she was. She didn't need to apologize for her lineage or her choices. Her mother loved her exactly as she was, and that meant the world to Clara. "I thought I had lost you forever, but now I see you're even stronger than I imagined," her mother said, with a proud yet loving expression. Clara sighed and replied, "I've learned a lot, Mum. I'm not the girl who feared the future anymore. I'm the woman who will shape it." Her mother smiled softly, words unspoken, because both knew Clara's journey wasn't over. She had found her strength, but the world around her still awaited her transformation. The embrace lasted for long minutes, a comforting silence between them. Clara knew their story wouldn't end there, but that moment was like a conclusion, a silent promise that no matter what the future brought, they would be together. Her mother's love was the foundation Clara needed to move forward. No matter how great the power she carried, what truly mattered was the bond she would never lose, the bond with those who loved her and always believed in her. As they parted, Clara looked at her mother with a smile, and for the first time she felt she was home. She had defeated evil, overcome her own fears, and now, in her mother's arms, she felt that the greatest triumph of all was finding the true meaning of family, forgiveness, and unconditional love. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and red, and Clara stood at the village's entrance, looking toward the horizon. Beside her, her mother, still with teary eyes, held her hand with a silent strength. The reunion had healed many wounds, but Clara knew there was more to be done. Her fight wasn't over. The power she now carried and the responsibility that came with it still demanded difficult choices. Her victory over Gabriel was undoubtedly a milestone, not just for defeating the villain, but for the liberation Clara had experienced in confronting her own fear and inner demons. But there was something she hadn't yet faced. The real consequences of her choices. The world had changed, but how would she use the power she now possessed? She no longer feared external forces, but the true battle was still within her. How could she ensure it didn't consume her as it had so many before? It was at that moment that Samuel appeared, emerging from one of the forest paths. His demeanor was serious, but his eyes reflected a pride Clara couldn't ignore. He approached slowly, and upon seeing Clara, gave a discreet bow. "You did more than I expected, Clara. The lineage you carry isn't something anyone could control, but you made the right choice. You chose to use the power for good." His words were simple, but they carried a weight Clara felt in her heart. Samuel hadn't been just a guide for her, but a bridge between past and future. He had believed in her when no one else did. Clara looked at him, gratitude in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Samuel," she said. "But what happens now? What happens to the world that still needs change? What happens to others like Gabriel?" Samuel smiled faintly and responded with the wisdom that had always guided her. "Now, you have the power to shape the future. The world needs people like you, Clara. It's not enough to defeat an enemy and hope everything improves. The real work begins now. The reward isn't in a title, wealth, or recognition. It's in the ability to do good, to turn pain into strength, to offer others the opportunity you had." Clara looked at her mother, who smiled with pride. She knew the world she wanted to build wouldn't be easy to create, but she also knew that with the right choices, she could be the key to that transformation. She didn't need a throne or riches to be happy. The true reward lay in using her power for the good of others, creating a future where more people could be free, where more like her could find the hope they needed. The next day, Clara organized a meeting with the villagers. What she proposed wasn't an immediate revolution or a grand power shift, but a quiet, true transformation. She spoke to them about her lessons, what she had faced, and how, together, they could begin to rebuild what had been destroyed. Her mark, once a symbol of oppression, now became a symbol of freedom and leadership. The people listened attentively, and she realized that even without titles or power, she was already changing the world, one person at a time. As Clara prepared for the next step, she realized that though her journey thus far had been arduous, what she had achieved wasn't just the defeat of a villain, but a true victory over doubt. She had proven herself capable of being the leader the world needed. And her reward wouldn't be gold or a crown, but the smiles of the people she was helping to transform. Samuel, though no longer living there, visited from time to time. Always discreet, he merely watched from a distance and smiled to see what Clara had built. He knew his mission was complete. Clara was now more than a lineage heir. She was a beacon, and when she saw him arrive, she ran to share all the news. as if he were an old friend who never left. There was a silent, deep respect between them, one that needed no words. Gradually, Clara realized her story was inspiring others in neighboring villages. Small groups began to form with the same ideals: mutual help, justice, shared wisdom. Ordinary people who once didn't believe in themselves now rose, motivated by her journey. Clara never imagined she could move so much just by being herself, but she understood that when you live with truth, the world notices. And even with all this growth, she remained simple. She still woke early, had coffee with her mother, tended the plants, wrote letters to the children who were adopted, and moved to new homes. Her power, once a source of fear, was now used to heal, to connect. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Her birthmark was now just a reminder of where it all began, and how she chose a different path. Clara knew her journey wasn't over, that the world still needed change, healing. And she also knew she couldn't do it all alone, but that no longer scared her. The new beginning she had built was solid, not because of walls or riches, but because of roots planted with love and courage. And if one day another child appeared with a mark like hers, Clara would know exactly what to do. And so, with the gentle morning breeze blowing through her hair and the laughter of children in the background, Clara looked at the sky and smiled. There was no more pain, only gratitude. She hadn't just survived, she had been reborn, and with her, a new world was blossoming. Clara sat on the old swing in the garden that had once been just an abandoned space. The soft wind rocked her memories, bringing fragments of the past that now seemed distant, almost unreal. She thought of everything she had lived through, the pain, the losses, the battles, but also the moments of hope, reunion, and transformation. Life, she realized, is a delicate thread between light and shadow, and what matters is the courage to choose light even when everything seems dark. Her birthmark, once a source of fear and rejection, now glowed softly, an eternal reminder of her identity, her strength, and the legacy she carried. Clara understood that each of us has within us a flame, a light that can be dimmed by hardships but never extinguished if we hold on to faith. That light is our essence, our hope, our ability to start anew. She smiled at the starry sky, feeling a deep peace. Life isn't about where you begin, but what you choose to do with what you have, she thought. No matter the origin nor the marks we carry, it's our decisions, made with the heart, that define who we are. Clara knew her journey had no end because living is about learning, growing, and transforming. Each step was an opportunity to be better, to help, to love. Around her, the world continued, full of challenges and uncertainties, but also infinite possibilities. Her story, she thought, wasn't just hers. It belonged to all who had suffered, who had been rejected, who fought against darkness and found light. It was a story of overcoming, courage, and hope, one that could inspire anyone to seek their own path. Clara wished for everyone who heard her story to understand something essential. No matter how hard the road, no matter how many times fear tries to paralyze you, there's always a greater strength within. A strength that can turn wounds into wisdom, pain into compassion, weakness into power. That's the true magic of life, the ability to rise from the ashes. She knew that as long as she carried that light, she would never be alone. That true family isn't just born of blood, but those we choose, those who support us, who walk beside us. Clara felt gratitude for her mother, for Samuel, for the children who now called her Aunt Clara, and for all who helped her become who she was. And with one last look at the sky, Clara made a silent promise to keep fighting, not for revenge or power, but for justice, love, and truth. To continue being a beacon for those still wandering in the shadows, offering hope and opening paths. Because, in the end, the greatest victory isn't in defeating enemies, but in overcoming oneself. She closed her eyes, letting the night breeze caress her face, feeling finally at peace. A peace born of acceptance, courage, and unconditional love. A peace everyone can find if they have the strength to keep going, to believe, to love. And so, Clara's story became eternal, a reminder to us all that even in the darkest nights, there's always a light ready to shine.